At this point, almost every Splatoon player knows the story of the Dynamo Roller, the weapon that used to sit on arguably the largest throne in Splatoon 1. It had it all: insane damage, large hitbox, and threatening paint that made up for its slow speed and ink efficiency issues. Then, when Splatoon 2 released, it fell the hardest from grace out of any of the top tiers nerfed in the transition between the two games. In almost every area, it was weaker, spending the next few years sitting on the sidelines while countless other weapons got better mobility changes or new additions to the game that could do its old job better, such as Dreadringer. It's been almost 8 years now since this weapon had any meta relevance, but now people are saying it might be back to its former glory. So since I've spent a bit of time bashing this weapon in the past, let's take a look at its recovery process and see if Dynamo is finally back. Be sure to subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and let's get started. Dynamo got a lot of buffs when catching up to today, a total of 18 of them. And funny enough, when looking back, these aren't minuscule buffs. Most of them are actually pretty good, though they are rather gradual and spread out with their pacing. While early Splatoon 2 corrected its minimum and maximum damage and increased its kill range, we're still far behind its Splatoon 1 rates. Even the paint was adjusted, but again, is still significantly under where it used to be. The weapon went from arguably the worst weapon ever introduced to the series to a decent mid-tier by the end of that game, but even that was mostly due to two factors that were temporary. And I'll be passing the mic to Droid to talk about them.
The first of which was MPU, which brought the damage back up to increase its kill range. As someone who started with Splatoon 2, this was a godsend. The change only made it do 15% more damage, which let it one-shot a little farther than before, but it was still less than Splatoon 1's. So anyone who knew of Splatoon's past would know Dynamo was still not back in its glory days. Splatoon 2 did do one thing right though, and that's when they added the Kensa Dynamo kit. Splatoon 1's kits weren't that bad, but they were never as impactful as the Kensa one in S2. Back in Splatoon 1, the vanilla Dynamo Roller did have Sprinkler, but it cost 80% of its ink tank, which stopped it from being an actual viable movement tool. Splatoon 2's Sprinkler was cheaper and painted way more in Throne, which let Dynamo use it as a kind of Temu burst bomb. This meant Dynamo had a consistent mobility option as a sub for the first time, which really proved to help conserve its life. Booyah Bomb also gave K-Dynamo even more survivability. It was another painting tool while still being a semi-quick ink refill, which is always great for Dynamo, considering how ink hungry it is. The jump to Splatoon 3 was great for Dynamo, because of things like Ink Armor not existing, and Squid Roll letting Dynamo have a mobility tool that was just as strong as every other weapons. The first kit being Sprinkler and Cooler would prove to be solid, given that the latter became a staple of Splatoon 3's meta for a long time. However, because Dynamo's paint still wasn't the best, having Cooler at 190p barred it from being a cooler option, so for the time, it lagged behind Kensa Dynamo. Splatoon 3 also introduced more mid-range weapons, like the Splatanas, which are all viable in their own ways, and mobility options were either added or buffed for weapons like Slosher, Blaster, in almost every dueling shooter. So Dynamo was back to low tier hell for the time being.
Splatoon 3's first year continued the trend of slow, small buffs. It got a little bit better damage equivalent to having partial amounts of main power-up. Cooler became meta, which didn't really help Dynamo very much given it could not get enough of them to be relevant in that, and it got a little bit less frames before you could recover your ink tank. But it wasn't until version 6.1 where the first big leap really happened. Splatoon 3 has made it its mission to restore roller horizontal flicks in this game, increasing the width of the maximum damage zone for all of them. And this especially helped Dynamo with its consistency, making it much easier to get one-shots on opponents, which is still more fair than Splatoon 1 since the hitbox is smaller from the majority of the period it had back then. This is the first real restoration of its old power, but then it felt like that was all we were gonna get. Instead of a paint buff, this weapon simply had it adjusted to be more consistent, which actually made it paint about 1 point less per flick. And then, another year of radio silence. Content for the game slowed down, the third Dynamo kit was an absolute fumble, despite what Sheldon says about it, and it looked like the weapon was going to have to wait for yet another Splatoon game before it ever had a real chance. Dynamo's ink efficiency got more lenient. I would like to do the opposite of that. I think Dynamo Roller should be extremely ink hungry, but in exchange, I would like to drastically boost the power of its flicks. Then when all hopes seem lost for the tale, 11.0 supercharged Dynamo in a way I almost can't believe is real. One of the largest sets of buffs ever done in Splatoon 3's history, if not the largest. And I mean it. These two buffs it got in this one update are about as comparable in a power increase to every single buff it got over the previous like 8 years in strength. The horizontal kill range was buffed, and by a lot. It was now once again able to outrange short-range shooters, and even the weaker vertical flick more closely matched some mid-range weapons like Splattershot Pro. But everyone knows Dynamo needed one more thing, and it did get that. Its old paint output. Horizontal flick now turfs amazing, and while vertical is still underwhelming, the increase it got made it situationally useful when you need to turf from farther away, or to get more paint when you're poking enemies with it. It also now gets plenty of cooler, so that kit is amazing. To be honest, it might even need to be 200p instead of 190 in the future, wouldn't surprise me. The weapon now finally had all the qualities that made it good in the first place, but this did come at a slight cost. Its ink efficiency was nerfed, now being even worse than in Splatoon 1, giving a pathetic 4 flicks on a full ink tank, but honestly, I think that's fair. If the weapon's gonna have the same strengths that made it amazing before, it probably deserves the same downsides too. It's part of what made the weapon special after all. But that all being said, the game has changed a lot since Dynamo was meta. Does this version of it really function in the modern era? Now, with the patch being new and so game-changing, it's hard to say for sure, but I think I would say that Dynamo is back. At most levels of play, the weapon functions incredibly well, has a solid kit, and plays in a way that is more healthy than its Splatoon 1 incarnation, being a little bit toned back in areas like its hitbox size, while overall retaining the strengths and qualities that made it so fun in the first place. When it comes to a competitive level though, the question is going to be on weapon comps. Dynamo, alongside similar weapons like Dreadringer, has a bit of a problem. Compared to other support weapons, they're much slower. They don't have the ability to pull opponents away, and they often require more aggressive playstyles that put them at risk of death. That means that it's going to be a bit trickier to slot it into a typical weapon composition. And this is especially important because it's a tacticooler weapon, meaning that it's not going to want to work best with a typical pencil composition, but probably something more niche. The main option that seems to be there for this weapon being the Tri-Stringer, one that has similar AoE, paints at a safe distance, and ultimately pairs very well with this weapon's strengths. For other weapon compositions, pairing it with pretty much any good midline gun seems to make a lot of sense. Swords have their AoE covered, and if you want to stack on it, S-Blast and Slosher do a great job of it, though I would lean to options with support tools like Vanilla Blaster, Mint Decavitator, or S-Blast 91. Having a weapon that can have a little bit more ability while still being good at fighting is also important for it. If you want to lean to the support route, this might mean options like Dually, Vanilla Mini Smiling, or Forged Splattershot Pro. But I think it's more likely to be either Dapple Dualies or maybe Tetra if the buffs end up being a lot for it. Dapple is an insane weapon we've seen make up for slower options with a Bow and Vac 96 comp, which had similar problems. That said, as of now, there's no major results with the weapon, so I can't predict if anything is going to happen, but I will say it would genuinely surprise me if this state of Dynamo wasn't good enough to start getting some results. I think it's a high or even potentially top tier weapon now, and honestly, I'm really happy to see it in this spot. But this brings me to one last discussion. Can this stuff happen more, please? One of the biggest problems Splatoon has is that its buffs are often very slow or very minimal. In Dynamo's case, while the buffs were impactful, they were over such a long period of time. People years ago realized what the problems were with Splatoon 1 over-nerfing the weapon, and it's kind of crazy that it took this long for it to happen. Not that I'm ungrateful it happened at all, honestly, but when I look at this game, other low-tier weapons honestly get similar treatment. Small, occasional buffs spread out through a long period of time that feel like they're looking at the weapon as if it was already performing fairly well. I want to see these kind of drastic or more creative sets of buffs done with other weaker tier weapons. Reworks to options like Splattershot Nova or GooTuber could be really interesting, but we'll have to see if that's something that happens. In the same update that Dynamo got these groundbreaking buffs, H3, a weapon in a similar spot to it, just got one more damage. So it's really hard to tell what the future is, but I hope the positive reception around Dynamo's changes, at least for the most part, will be something that gives the devs a little bit more courage to go for more creative and exciting buffs around its weaker weapons. That said, let me know what you think of the new and improved Dynamo in the comments down below, and I will see you all next time.